My name is Natalie, I'm 34 years old, and 3 weeks ago I watched my own family carve up my father's empire like vultures over a fresh kill, completely unaware that I'd already bought the knife they were using. Picture this, I'm sitting in my late father's mahogany-paneled office, surrounded by his children from 3 different marriages, listening to my half-brother Derek announce how he's generously dividing Dad's $50 million estate. The kicker? My name wasn't mentioned once in his little presentation. Not once. But here's what none of them knew, what I'd spent 5 years quietly orchestrating while they were busy playing house and spending Dad's money. Every company, every property, every asset they were so eagerly dividing up? I already owned controlling interest in all of it. If you've ever been the black sheep of your family, the one they underestimated while you were quietly building an empire, this story is going to hit differently. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's already being 10 steps ahead. Before we dive deep into this, hit that like button if you believe in the power of patience and strategic thinking. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. I love connecting with people who understand that sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. Let me take you back to the beginning, to understand how the forgotten daughter became the puppet master of her own family's downfall. My father, Richard Sterling, was a brilliant businessman and a terrible father. He built Sterling Enterprises from a single construction company into a diversified empire worth $50 million, hotels, real estate, manufacturing, you name it. But Richard had one fatal flaw, he couldn't keep it in his pants. 3 marriages, 5 children, and decades of drama later, I was the product of marriage number 2. My mother, Elena, was a kind woman who died when I was 16, leaving me alone in a house full of people who saw me as an obstacle to their inheritance. Derek, Dad's oldest son from his first marriage, was 38 and had spent his entire adult life as Dad's heir apparent. Tall, charming, with that easy confidence that comes from never having to prove yourself. He ran the day-to-day operations of Sterling Enterprises, though ran was a generous term. More like showed up to board meetings and collected paychecks. Then there was Melissa, Derek's full sister, 36, and married to a plastic surgeon who owned half of Beverly Hills. She'd appointed herself the family's social coordinator, organizing events and managing Dad's public image. Beautiful, manipulative, and absolutely convinced that her doe-eyed Southern belle act made her untouchable. From Dad's 3rd marriage came the twins, Chloe and Cameron, both 25. Chloe was an aspiring influencer with 200,000 Instagram followers and the financial literacy of a golden retriever. Cameron was equally vapid, spending his days surfing and his nights spending Dad's money in West Hollywood clubs. And then there was me. The middle child. The quiet one. The one who went to Stanford on academic scholarships while they went to USC on Dad's donations. The one who got her MBA while working full-time, who built her own investment firm from scratch, who never asked Dad for a dime after I turned 18. To them, I was Natalie the Invisible. Present at family gatherings but never really seen. They knew I had some kind of finance job, but they'd never bothered to learn the details. Why would they? I wasn't part of their inner circle, their planning sessions, their inheritance fantasies. What they didn't know was that for the past 5 years, while they were playing their little power games, I'd been systematically acquiring minority stakes in every single Sterling Enterprises subsidiary through shell companies and private equity partnerships. It started small. Dad had cash flow problems in 2019, the kind wealthy families never discuss publicly. Sterling Hotels needed a $5 million capital injection, and the banks were getting nervous about the company's debt-to-equity ratio. Through my investment firm, Natalie Capital Management, I quietly provided the funding in exchange for a 15% stake. Dad never knew it was me. The paperwork showed funding from Meridian Investment Group, one of my shell companies. To him, I was just his middle daughter who sent flowers on his birthday and attended Christmas dinner without causing drama. But I was studying him, learning his patterns, understanding his weaknesses. Richard Sterling was brilliant at building companies but terrible at maintaining them. He'd expand too fast, leverage too heavily, then scramble to find capital when markets shifted. Every time Sterling Enterprises needed money, and it needed money often, Natalie Capital Management was there with a solution. Not as his daughter Natalie, but as a mysterious investment firm with deep pockets and seemingly unlimited patience. By 2022, I held minority stakes in Sterling Hotels, 15%, Sterling Construction, 22%, Sterling Properties, 18%, and Sterling Manufacturing, 20%. But minority stakes weren't enough. I needed control. The opportunity came last year when Dad decided to take Sterling Enterprises public. He needed $30 million to restructure debt and fund expansion. The family was ecstatic. Going public would make them all multimillionaires on paper. But Dad made a crucial mistake. He structured the IPO to maintain family control through a complex series of voting trusts and preferred shares. The Sterling family would control 51% of voting shares, with the remaining 49% sold to the public. What he didn't account for was that one of his public investors was his own daughter. Through a network of shell companies, investment partnerships, and strategic alliances I'd spent 3 years building, I quietly acquired 31% of the publicly traded shares. Combined with my existing minority stakes in the subsidiaries, I effectively controlled 37% of Sterling Enterprises. But here's where it gets interesting. Dad's voting trust was structured to require unanimous consent for major decisions. If any family member disagreed, the trust would dissolve and revert to standard shareholder voting. Which meant that my 37% stake, while not technically a majority, gave me effective veto power over any family decision. Better yet, if I could convince just one other family member to side with me, I'd have working control of the entire company. But I didn't want control. I wanted something much more satisfying. I wanted them to destroy themselves. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Let them fight over the estate, let them reveal their true nature, let them show the world exactly who they really were. Then, when they were at their most vulnerable, when they'd burned every bridge and exposed every weakness, I'd reveal that their victim had been their master all along. Dad's heart attack 3 months ago accelerated the timeline. He died at his desk on a Tuesday morning, surrounded by contracts and coffee cups, the way he'd lived his entire life. The funeral was a circus, 3 ex-wives, 5 children, dozens of business partners and politicians, all performing grief for the cameras. I played my role perfectly. The dutiful daughter, quietly mourning in the back row, letting Derek and Melissa orchestrate the proceedings. I gave a brief, tasteful eulogy about Dad's business acumen and dedication to family. No one suspected that I'd spent the previous week positioning my assets for what was coming next. The will reading was scheduled for exactly 3 weeks after the funeral. Dad's attorney, Harrison Webb, was a family friend who'd known me since childhood. What the family didn't realize was that Harrison had also been my legal counsel for the past 2 years, helping structure my shell companies and investment partnerships. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the 3 weeks between Dad's death and the will reading, 3 weeks that revealed exactly who my family really was when they thought no one was watching. The vultures circled before Dad was even in the ground. Derek immediately moved into Dad's house, claiming he needed to secure the estate's assets. What he really wanted was Dad's home office, with its hidden safe and private files. He spent hours going through documents, making lists, calculating values. I watched him through the security cameras I'd had installed months earlier. Yes, I'd been planning this for a long time. Melissa took charge of Dad's social obligations, canceling some meetings and rescheduling others. But what she was really doing was positioning herself as the family spokesperson, the one outsiders would see as Dad's natural successor. The twins were more direct in their greed. Chloe started measuring Dad's house for renovations, planning how she'd redecorate once she inherited it. Cameron began reaching out to Dad's car collection dealers, getting appraisals on the vintage Porsches and Ferraris he'd always coveted. And through it all, they barely acknowledged my existence. I was the middle child, the quiet one, the one who'd never been part of Dad's inner circle. Why would they worry about me? 3 days after the funeral, Derek called a family meeting. We gathered in Dad's conference room, the same room where he'd built his empire, now repurposed for its division. "I've been going through Dad's papers," Derek announced, spreading financial documents across the mahogany table. "The estate is even more valuable than we thought. Conservatively, we're looking at $50 million in assets." Melissa leaned forward, her manicured fingers drumming on the table. "What's the breakdown?" "Sterling Enterprises is worth about $35 million based on the current stock price. The real estate portfolio, the house, the Colorado cabin, the Malibu property, adds another $8 million. Then there's the car collection, art, jewelry, and liquid assets bringing us to roughly $50 million total." Cameron practically drooled. "So what does that mean for each of us?" Derek smiled that patronizing smile I'd grown to hate. "Well, that depends on how Dad structured the will. But traditionally, the oldest son inherits the business interests, with other assets divided among the remaining children." "Traditionally?" I spoke for the first time, my voice cutting through their excitement. Derek glanced at me with barely concealed irritation. "Yes, Natalie. Dad always talked about keeping the business in the family, maintaining legacy. That means someone with actual business experience should take the lead." "And you think that's you?" I asked quietly. "I've been running day-to-day operations for 15 years. I understand the company, the employees, the challenges. It's the logical choice." Melissa nodded enthusiastically. "Derek's right. He's been Dad's right hand forever. And honestly, Vicky, you've never shown much interest in the family business." The dismissal stung, even though I'd expected it. I'd shown plenty of interest, I'd just shown it quietly, strategically, without fanfare or family meetings. "What about equal division?" I suggested. 5 children, 5 equal shares." Chloe laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Come on, Natalie. That's not how inheritance works. Some people contribute more than others." "And what exactly have you contributed?" I asked. Her face flushed. "I've been Dad's social media manager. Do you know how much business his Instagram account has generated? I built his entire online presence." I bit back a laugh. Dad's Instagram account had 12,000 followers, most of them his own employees and business associates. But pointing that out would only reveal my hand too early. "Look," Derek said, trying to sound reasonable. "We'll all be taken care of. But someone needs to run the companies, make the decisions, maintain Dad's legacy. That someone is me." Over the next 2 weeks, I watched their true colors emerge like a slow-developing photograph. Derek began making calls to Sterling Enterprises clients, positioning himself as Dad's successor. He scheduled meetings with board members, started talking about his vision for the company's future. He even had new business cards printed with Derek Sterling, CEO, in raised gold lettering. Melissa focused on the social assets, Dad's country club memberships, charity board positions, political connections. She saw herself as the family matriarch, the one who'd maintain their social standing in the community. The twins were more mercenary. Chloe hired an appraiser for Dad's art collection and jewelry, while Cameron had several of Dad's cars moved to his apartment complex, claiming he was protecting them from theft. And through it all, they treated me like an afterthought. Family dinner invitations became increasingly rare. Important decisions were made in group chats I wasn't included in. When I did ask questions about the estate planning, I was told not to worry about complicated business matters. They were erasing me from the family narrative while I was still breathing. But I had my own preparations to make. Working through Harrison Webb, I began calling in favors and positioning assets. The beauty of my 5-year plan was that it had created leverage points throughout Sterling Enterprises' ecosystem. Suppliers who depended on Sterling contracts, clients who valued our relationship, board members who'd grown comfortable with the status quo, they all had reasons to listen when Natalie Capital Management made suggestions. I also started documenting everything. Every family meeting, every dismissive comment, every assumption about my capabilities. My phone became a recording device, capturing conversations that would prove very interesting to certain parties later. The most revealing moment came 6 days before the will reading. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but Derek and Melissa thought they were alone in Dad's office when I arrived early for Sunday dinner. The will reading is just a formality, Derek was saying. Harrison already confirmed that I'm getting the business. Natalie gets some real estate and a trust fund, enough to keep her comfortable but not enough to cause problems. Good, Melissa replied. She's never understood business anyway. Too emotional, too idealistic. Dad knew she couldn't handle the responsibility. The twins will get their shares of the liquid assets. They'll blow through it in 5 years, but that's their choice. At least they won't interfere with serious decisions. I stood in the hallway, recording every word, feeling that familiar mixture of hurt and rage that had defined my relationship with this family for decades. What about the public shareholders? Melissa asked. Won't they expect some kind of transition plan? Derek laughed. The public owns 49% of the company, but we control the voting trust. As long as the family sticks together, we make all the real decisions. The shareholders just get their dividends and keep quiet. If only he knew that 31% of those public shareholders were actually shell companies controlled by his quiet little sister. Harrison says there might be some media attention around the succession, Melissa continued. Dad was pretty well known in business circles. Let them write their articles. Sterling Enterprises passes to next generation, family business maintains legacy. It's all good publicity. I walked away that day knowing exactly how the will reading would go. Dad would lead Derek the controlling interest in Sterling Enterprises, Melissa would get significant real estate assets, the twins would receive trust funds and liquid assets, and I'd get some secondary properties and a modest trust fund. What they didn't know was that their inheritance was an illusion. You can't inherit what someone else already owns. The morning of the will reading, I woke up in my downtown penthouse and put on my best armor, a charcoal Armani suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, subtle jewelry that whispered rather than shouted wealth, and the kind of confidence that comes from holding all the cards while everyone else thinks they're playing poker. I arrived at Harrison Webb's law offices exactly on time. The family was already there, dressed in their own versions of Inheritance Day attire. Derek in his navy suit, trying to look presidential. Melissa in designer black, playing the grieving daughter. The twins in whatever they'd pulled from their closets that morning, both clearly hungover but trying to look respectful. Harrison's conference room was all dark wood and leather, the kind of old money aesthetic that was supposed to make you feel the weight of tradition and legacy. Perfect setting for what was about to unfold. Before we begin, Harrison announced, I want to remind everyone that estate readings can be emotional. I ask that you hold your reactions until I've finished reading the entire document. Derek nodded solemnly, already practicing his gracious acceptance speech. Melissa dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, performing grief for an audience of attorneys and siblings. The last will and testament of Richard James Sterling, Harrison began, his voice carrying decades of legal authority. The standard language came first, Dad's sound mind, the revocation of previous wills, the appointment of Harrison as executor. Then we got to the meat of it. To my son Derek Sterling, who has dedicated 15 years to Sterling Enterprises, I leave my controlling interest in the company, including all voting shares and board positions. Derek, I trust you to maintain the legacy we built together and to care for the employees who depend on us. Derek closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. His moment of triumph. To my daughter Melissa Sterling Hartwell, I leave my primary residence and the Colorado Mountain property, along with all furnishings, art, and personal effects contained therein. Melissa, you've always understood the importance of maintaining our family's social standing. Melissa squeezed her husband's hand, already mentally redecorating. To my daughter Chloe Sterling, I leave a trust fund in the amount of $3 million, to be administered by Harrison Webb until she reaches the age of 30. Chloe, I hope this gives you the freedom to pursue your creative interests. Chloe mouthed $3 million to herself, probably calculating how many Instagram-worthy vacations that would buy. To my son Cameron Sterling, I leave my car collection and a trust fund in the amount of $3 million, with the same age restrictions as his sister. Cameron, may these assets remind you that success requires both passion and responsibility. Cameron's eyes lit up thinking about Dad's vintage Porsche collection. Then came my turn. To my daughter Natalie Sterling, I leave the Malibu property and a trust fund in the amount of $2 million, to be administered until she reaches the age of 35. The room fell silent. $2 million. The Malibu house was nice, but it was the smallest of Dad's properties. And a trust fund administered until I was 35? I was already 34. Derek tried to look sympathetic. Natalie, I know it seems, Harrison held up his hand. I'm not finished. He turned the page and continued reading, but his tone had changed subtly. However, these bequests are contingent upon the family's continued ownership of Sterling Enterprises and its subsidiaries. In the event that control of Sterling Enterprises has been transferred to outside parties prior to my death, the above distributions are null and void. The room stirred. Derek frowned. What does that mean? Harrison looked directly at me, and I saw the smallest hint of a smile. It means, Derek, that your father discovered some very interesting information about Sterling Enterprises' ownership structure in the weeks before his death. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. According to documents filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, Harrison continued, Sterling Enterprises is currently controlled by a network of investment companies and shell corporations that collectively hold 37% of the company's voting shares. Derek's face went white. That's impossible. The family controls 51%. The family controls 51% through a voting trust that requires unanimous consent. But that trust can be dissolved by any family member who controls sufficient external shares to demand restructuring. Melissa leaned forward. Harrison, what are you talking about? What external shares? Harrison opened a thick folder and spread documents across the conference table. Corporate filings, stock certificates, investment agreements, 5 years of careful planning laid out in black and white. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to the actual controlling shareholder of Sterling Enterprises, Natalie Capital Management, owned and operated by Natalie Sterling. The silence that followed was the kind you hear right before an avalanche. Derek stared at the documents, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. This can't be real. Oh, it's very real, I said, speaking for the first time since the reading began. Natalie Capital Management has been Sterling Enterprises' primary creditor and investor for the past 5 years. Every time Dad needed capital, every time the company faced cash flow problems, BCM provided funding in exchange for equity stakes. Melissa's voice cracked. "You're our sister. You can't just." "I can, and I did." I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city. "While you were all planning how to spend Dad's money, I was earning it. While you were fighting over inheritances, I was building the companies that generate them." Chloe found her voice. "This is fraud. You manipulated Dad, took advantage of him." I turned back to face them. "I provided legal, arm's-length investment services to Sterling Enterprises through my properly licensed and regulated investment firm. Every transaction was reviewed by independent attorneys and accountants. Nothing I did was illegal or unethical." "But you didn't tell us," Derek said, his voice rising. "You let us believe, I let you believe what you wanted to believe. That I was just Natalie the Invisible, too emotional and idealistic to understand business. Your assumptions were never my responsibility to correct." Harrison cleared his throat. "There's more." He pulled out another set of documents. "Your father also discovered that his children had been borrowing against their expected inheritances. Derek, you've taken $400,000 in advances from Sterling Enterprises over the past 2 years. Melissa, your husband received a $300,000 loan from Sterling Financial Services. Chloe, your credit cards are backed by Sterling guarantees to the tune of $150,000. Cameron, your car purchases and apartment lease are currently subsidized by Sterling Real Estate Holdings." The family looked like they'd been hit by a truck. "In total," Harrison continued, "the Sterling children have accumulated $1.2 million in debt against the estate. Debt that becomes immediately payable upon Richard's death." Derek found his voice. "Dad approved all of those advances. They're family expenses. Family expenses taken from a company that's now controlled by Natalie," Harrison replied smoothly. "Which brings us to the final provision of your father's will." He pulled out one last document, this one sealed with red wax. Richard Sterling was many things, but he wasn't stupid. In the final weeks of his life, he began to understand the scope of Natalie's business acumen. This is a codicil to his will, dated just 5 days before his death. Harrison broke the seal and read, "To my daughter Natalie, who has proven herself the true heir to Sterling Enterprises through merit rather than birthright, I leave my complete confidence in her judgment. The other bequests in this will are void. Natalie will determine what, if anything, her siblings receive from the estate." The room exploded. Derek shot to his feet. "This is insane. You can't just give everything to her." Melissa was crying real tears now. "Natalie, please. We're family. You can't do this to us." Chloe had gone full tantrum mode. "This isn't fair. I deserve my inheritance." Cameron just sat there, staring at the documents like they might change if he looked hard enough. "But I wasn't done yet. I had one more revelation that would complete their destruction." "Harrison," I said calmly, "please show them the employment contracts." He smiled and pulled out yet another folder. "Ah yes. The employment agreements." He spread 5 contracts across the table. "Due to Natalie Capital Management's controlling interest in Sterling Enterprises, all existing employment arrangements are subject to review. Derek, as of today, your position as Chief Operating Officer is terminated. Your severance package will be $50,000, minus the $400,000 in advances you've taken." Derek's face turned purple. "You can't fire me. I built this company." "Actually, I can, and I just did. Melissa, your consulting contract with Sterling Marketing is also terminated." No severance, since you were never actually an employee. Melissa grabbed her husband's arm. Natalie, please. Think about what you're doing. We're your family. You're right, I said, sitting back down. You are my family. Which is why I'm going to give you the same consideration you've given me for the past 34 years. I looked around the table at their faces, Derek's rage, Melissa's desperation, the twins' confused terror. Here's what's going to happen. Derek, you have 30 days to repay your advances to Sterling Enterprises. Since you're unemployed as of today, I suggest you start liquidating assets. The new business cards were a nice touch, by the way. His jaw dropped. How did you? I know everything, Derek. Everything. Your plans to restructure the company, your meetings with clients, your assurances to the board. Did you really think I wouldn't be monitoring my own investment? I turned to Melissa. Your consulting contract is terminated, but I'm feeling generous. You can keep the country club membership for 6 months. After that, you're on your own. Her husband looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Chloe, Cameron, you're both adults. Time to act like it. The trust funds Dad mentioned? They never existed. He was planning to create them from his share of Sterling Enterprises, but since he doesn't actually own Sterling Enterprises anymore, there's nothing to fund them with. Chloe started sobbing. But Instagram. My followers. My brand. Your brand was built on Dad's money. Time to find out what you're actually worth. Cameron finally spoke. What about the cars? I almost laughed. The cars are Sterling Enterprises assets, Cameron. Company cars. You'll need to return them by Friday. The devastation on their faces was complete. Years of entitlement, decades of assumptions, a lifetime of treating me like an afterthought, all of it crashing down in one morning. But I wasn't finished. I had saved the best for last. There is one option, I said quietly. One way you can all walk away from this with something. Hope flickered in their eyes. Derek leaned forward. What option? You can apologize. The room went silent again. Not to me, I continued. To everyone you've hurt over the years. The employees you've dismissed, the clients you've taken for granted, the business partners you've condescended to. Public apologies, acknowledging that you're not qualified to run Sterling Enterprises and that you endorse my leadership going forward. Derek's face flushed. That's humiliation. That's accountability. You've spent years telling everyone you're business leaders. Time to prove it by doing what's best for the business. Melissa wiped her eyes. And if we do this? If we publicly apologize? Then I'll consider modest severance packages and references for future employment. Consider it my final gift to the family. The negotiations that followed were brutal. Derek refused at first, ranting about lawsuits and family loyalty and everything he'd sacrificed for the company. But Harrison had come prepared with 5 years of documentation showing exactly how I'd built my position legally and ethically. Melissa was more pragmatic. She could see the writing on the wall and was already thinking about damage control. How to spin this for their social circle, how to maintain some dignity in defeat. The twins were just confused. They'd never bothered to understand business or finance, and the sudden reversal of their fortunes was beyond their comprehension. In the end, they all agreed. Public apologies in exchange for modest settlements and positive references. It was more than they deserved, but I'm not vindictive, I'm strategic. The press conference was scheduled for the following week. Sterling Enterprises' new ownership structure would be announced, along with my appointment as CEO and chairman of the board. But first, I had some housekeeping to do. The Monday after the will reading, I walked into Sterling Enterprises as the majority owner for the first time. The building was exactly as I remembered from childhood visits, glass and steel, impressive and intimidating, designed to project power and success. The employees knew something was happening. Derek's absence was noticeable, and rumors had been spreading since the will reading. But they didn't know the full scope of the change until I called an all-hands meeting that afternoon. Standing in the same conference room where Derek had planned to announce his succession, I faced 200 employees who'd built their careers around Sterling Enterprises. "My name is Natalie Sterling," I began, "and as of today, I'm your new CEO." The murmur that ran through the crowd was part confusion, part excitement. Most of them knew me only as Richard Sterling's quiet daughter, if they knew me at all. Over the past 5 years, my investment firm has provided the capital that's kept Sterling Enterprises growing and profitable. Today, that relationship became official. I now control 37% of company shares, making me the largest single shareholder and your new leader. I spent the next hour outlining my vision for the company's future. Expansion into new markets, investment in employee development, modernization of our technology infrastructure. Everything Derek had talked about doing but never actually done. The response was overwhelmingly positive. These were people who'd watched Derek coast on his name while the real work was done by others. They'd seen Melissa's consulting fees and wondered what value she actually provided. They'd watched the twins treat the company like their personal ATM. But they'd also heard whispers about Natalie Capital Management's involvement in Sterling's success. The mysterious investment firm that seemed to understand their business better than their own management team. Now they knew the truth. The mysterious benefactor was one of their own. The press conference was a masterpiece of public relations strategy. Harrison had arranged for it to be held at Sterling Enterprises headquarters, with the entire board of directors present to show institutional support. Derek, Melissa, Chloe, and Cameron sat in the front row, dressed professionally and trying to look dignified. The apologies they'd prepared were carefully worded to acknowledge their mistakes without destroying their future prospects entirely. I wore my power suit, navy blue with a subtle pinstripe, tailored to perfection, accessorized with Dad's watch and Mom's pearls. The symbolism was intentional. I was carrying forward the best of Sterling family tradition while leaving behind the dysfunction. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, looking directly into the cameras, "I'm Natalie Sterling, and I'm here to talk about the future of Sterling Enterprises." I outlined the company's growth over the past 5 years, the strategic investments that had kept us profitable during challenging market conditions, and the vision for continued expansion. I spoke about employee development, client relationships, and community responsibility. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. "My siblings have asked to make statements about our family's transition," I said, stepping aside. Derek went first. His apology was stiff but complete, acknowledging that he'd been unprepared for the responsibilities of leadership and endorsing my appointment as CEO. He looked like he was swallowing glass, but he got through it. Melissa was more gracious, perhaps because she'd already started networking for her next opportunity. Her apology focused on the importance of family unity and supporting capable leadership. The twins were brief and awkward, clearly uncomfortable with public speaking but managing to hit the key points their attorneys had coached them on. And then it was over. 5 years of planning, months of preparation, weeks of anticipation, all leading to this moment when the family dynamic shifted permanently and publicly. The questions from reporters were predictable. How long had I been planning this? Was this a hostile takeover? What was my response to critics who said I'd deceived my family? I answered each question with the same calm professionalism I'd used in boardrooms for the past decade. This wasn't about revenge or family drama, it was about business. I'd earned my position through merit, I'd acted within the law, and I was focused on growing Sterling Enterprises for the benefit of all stakeholders. the market responded positively. Sterling Enterprises stock rose 12% in the days following the announcement, as investors showed confidence in the leadership transition. Industry analysts praised the move, noting that Natalie Capital Management's involvement had coincided with Sterling's strongest growth period in decades. But the real satisfaction came from the personal messages I received in the weeks that followed. From employees who'd felt undervalued and unheard during Derek's tenure, thanking me for giving them a voice and a future. From clients who'd grown frustrated with Sterling's inconsistent service, expressing relief that someone with actual business acumen was now in charge. From industry peers who'd wondered how Richard Sterling's children would handle succession, congratulating me on what many called the smoothest family business transition they'd ever witnessed. And yes, from my siblings. Derek's message came 2 weeks after the press conference. I hated every minute of this, but I have to admit, you outplayed us completely. The company's in better hands than it would have been with me. I hope we can figure out how to be family again someday. Melissa was more direct. You taught us a lesson we probably needed to learn. I'm proud of you, even if I'm not happy about losing my inheritance. Maybe it's time I earned something for myself. The twins took longer to process what had happened, but eventually they both reached out. Chloe was exploring opportunities in digital marketing, using the skills she'd actually developed rather than relying on family connections. Cameron had enrolled in business school, finally ready to learn about the industry he'd expected to inherit. 6 months later, Sterling Enterprises was thriving under my leadership. We'd expanded into 3 new markets, increased employee satisfaction scores by 40%, and grown revenue by 25%. The company Dad built was stronger than it had ever been, and it was stronger because it was finally being run by someone who'd earned the right to lead it. I still live in my downtown penthouse, but I've also kept the Malibu house Dad left me. It's become my weekend retreat, a place where I can think and plan and remember how far I've traveled from the invisible middle child who was supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps the family threw her way. The best part isn't the money or the power or even the public vindication. The best part is the respect. When I walk into board meetings now, people listen. When I speak at industry conferences, they take notes. When I make decisions about Sterling Enterprises' future, they matter. I earned all of it. But here's the final twist that even I didn't see coming. 3 months after taking over Sterling Enterprises, I received a call from Dad's personal banker. There was a safety deposit box registered under his name that hadn't been included in the estate inventory. Inside that box, I found a letter addressed to me, dated just 2 days before his death. My dear Natalie, it read, if you're reading this, then you've successfully taken control of Sterling Enterprises, and my other children are finally learning what it means to earn rather than inherit. I've known about Natalie Capital Management for over a year. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate when mysterious investment firms kept appearing with perfect solutions to my cash flow problems? I'm proud of you for building something magnificent while letting us all underestimate you. The truth is, I structured my will knowing you already controlled the company. The inheritance drama was my final gift to you, a chance to show your siblings exactly who they'd been dismissing all these years. They needed to lose everything to understand what they'd never earned. You are my true heir, Natalie. Not because of blood or birth order, but because you have the vision, discipline, and courage that building an empire requires. Sterling Enterprises was always meant to be yours. I just wanted you to take it on your own terms. Your proud father, Richard Sterling. P.S. Check the portfolio in the bottom of the box. I've been buying Natalie Capital Management stock for the past 6 months. Consider it my investment in the best CEO Sterling Enterprises has ever had. I sat in that bank vault, holding Dad's letter, and for the first time in months, I cried. Not from sadness or anger, but from the overwhelming realization that I hadn't been invisible after all. The man I'd spent my adult life trying to prove myself to had been watching and cheering from the sidelines all along. The portfolio he mentioned contained $5 million worth of Natalie Capital Management shares, his way of investing in my success even after death. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's becoming so successful that your enemy's opinions become irrelevant. My family spent years treating me like an afterthought, and I used that invisibility to build an empire they never saw coming. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who should believe in you most, remember this: their blindness is your advantage. Use it wisely, build something magnificent, and let your success speak louder than their doubts ever could. What's the most satisfying comeback you've ever witnessed? Share your story in the comments. I love hearing about moments when the underdog comes out on top. And if this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Sometimes the quiet ones have the loudest victories.